This webinar is brought to you by New Venture Fund, of course, and many thanks to Lee for his leadership there. We also have Make It Work and Alicia McMullen representing from that awesome organization, and of course, Vision Strategy. Next slide. So here's what we're going to cover today. Obviously, we're going to intro our speakers. Alicia is going to talk about the lessons that Make It Work learned in terms of cutting-edge digital strategies, next-generation strategies in a new era. I'm going to talk about how you can win the internet in this era of rapid innovation. And then we're going to look towards the future. We'll talk a little bit together, and we'll have time for a Q&A. Because look, there's a lot of really smart, energetic, amazing people on this call today. You could be doing anything with your day, but you've chosen your work and your life to make a difference in the world. And the whole point here is to make sure that you are using some of the lessons learned, but also the cutting-edge techniques, some of which have already been pioneered for many years in the for-profit sector, that the nonprofit sector needs to adapt in order to help good go viral. So why don't we head into introductions? Lee, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I would, and I hope you all take note of my fun fact. I am a product of New Jersey in the 1980s, and even though my mullet is gone, you can take the kid out of Jersey, but you can't take Jersey out of the kid. So I'm just really excited to be doing that, and we're thrilled that so many of you signed up to participate. And NVF really exists to help our projects succeed, and we're constantly trying to improve our core offerings to do that. But one of the ways that we think we can help you that we haven't been engaging in is by connecting projects to each other and helping projects learn from each other. And there's so much great work that's happening here at NVF. We thought that we could and should be doing more to showcase it internally. And this topic is a great example of that. Engaging your audiences is critical for so many of our NVF projects. And I'm really grateful to Alicia and the Make It Work team and Cheryl and Vision and her team for sharing their expertise. So I'm not going to say too much more and let's get into it, but I really would love your feedback on this webinar, what we could do to be making it better, what works, and what other topics you'd like to hear about. After the webinar, along with the PDF of the presentation, you'll get a survey, so I would really appreciate you filling out the survey and letting us know what worked and what didn't and what else we should be covering. Also, my email address is at the end of this presentation. Please feel free to shoot me an email and let me know what you think. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Cheryl, right?
That was amazing. Thanks for that context setting and introduction, particularly the Bon Jovi fact. Next slide, Alicia, tell us more about you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Lee and Cheryl. I'm really excited to be here representing Make It Work. I'm the communications director of Make It Work. We all work remotely, so I am based here in, for once, sunny Seattle. Over 15 years of communication, primarily working on with nonprofit organizations, either through in-house communications or through communications and PR firms that focus on communications. Before I was at Make It Work, I was most recently at the ACLU, so definitely lots of experience trying to figure out how to message those complicated issues. My fun fact is that I was innocently on the way to get some frozen yogurt when me and a group of friends were picked up by a cab that was actually the cash cab. And even though I was like a total goober for most of the ride and just beaming and not answering any questions, I did know the final answer to win the whole thing. So winning strategies once again. I'm excited to be here, and over to you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Well, that actually vibes with our topic or the sub-theme, which is getting the right person at the right time with the right message or the right question, as it were. So this is me. I'm the Chief Empowerment Officer here at Vision Strategy. And at Vision, we've worked with hundreds of nonprofits, foundations, mission-driven companies to build digital-driven movements that succeed through the power of people. Other things I've been up to, I'm also the creator of a tech startup with Roz Lemieux called Attentively, and Attentively recently became the first tech startup with a Black female founder on board to be acquired by a NASDAQ company. So we're really proud to be a leader in the social innovation space that way. And learning from that startup world, I was able, with Van Jones, a good friend, I think, of probably a bunch of people on the call, to launch Yes We Code, which aims to help low-opportunity youth to become high-quality technologists, because our jobs are cool, right? More people should know that. People often ask me what Tai Chi sword is, and my answer to that is that it's Tai Chi, but with a sword. And I actually own 4 different swords, one of which is travel. It collapses. So it's pretty cool. Next slide. So why are we doing this? Lee also just talked a little bit about why we're planning to do this. But Lee, do you want to dig a little deeper into why this is so important to talk about next generation strategies right now?
It seems, well, right now, NVF has 175-ish projects, and almost all of them are facing some kind of new threat that they didn't face before. And the work that we've all been doing for years is under threat. And as we have seen, it's so important to be able to engage supporters in this work. We've all seen, so many people are more interested, and how can we tap that energy and harness it and really raise people's voices so that people who are ultimately affected by some of these decisions that are being made here in Washington and around the country are impacted.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Alicia, please, let's go to the next slide, and we'd love to hear from you. I think that Make It Work had some really amazing successes, even as we face some setbacks as a movement as a whole. Let's hear from you about Make It Work's experience.
Great, thank you. Next slide. So I'm actually going to say something positive about 2016. Despite the outcome of the presidential election, we saw signs across the country that gave us hope and energy to move forward with focus in 2017. So let me unpack that. What does that really mean? Based on our experience, deep engagement and meaningful progress is still possible when you connect with people where they are. I don't mean literally where they are. I mean that you need to be able to connect with people culturally through the words we use, the images, and the spokespeople that we use. We need to start using language that our audience uses and centering our work and personal stories. We also need to be where our audience is in time. And by that, I mean be relevant. We need to really start to unpack and understand the intersection between politics and pop culture. Instead of always leading about what we want to talk about, we need to talk about our issue agenda through what other people are talking about, and find connections to the things that are really bubbling to the top for people. I think it's sad, but a great example of that really recently is Jimmy Kimmel, using the opportunity of his opening monologue to earnestly talk about his baby son's heart surgery and the need for all people to have health care. That is, for many of our organizations, a really natural and easy opportunity and opening to start talking to people about politics and the political issues that drive so much of our work. So that's just one example of how we need to start thinking about our work through the lens of where other people are. So I'm going to talk through just a handful of lessons learned in 2016 through our work that really ties back to how we connect with people where they are. Next slide. So in 2016, we really aimed to create a communications trifecta, and that is the right messenger for a targeted audience plus good content should equal success. The right messenger is really about your audience, not always about the biggest name or star power that you can get. I know that many of us have been sitting around the old brainstorm table trying to figure out, like, how can we get Shonda Rhimes to do this? What's Kerry Washington doing? And that is not always going to be the best use of your brain power or investment. Up and coming influencers or celebrities can have just as much impact, if not more, and for a fraction of the cost and resources. This is particularly true when you think of your messenger in terms of a tailored and specific audience. So the still image you see on this slide is of Phoebe Robinson. She is a fabulous comedian and most recently the star of the podcast Two Dope Queens. And she was the star of our Pay Gap Explainer video. And this was one of our best performing pieces of content last year. We had a relatively low ad spend on Facebook of about $7,500, and for that we got almost 1 million views. We did projects with celebrities that have much bigger name recognition and had to spend 3 times that much on ads to get about the same amount of views. Add to that compelling content. For the script of this particular piece, she had a strong hand in helping us to craft the messaging there. So like letting creators lead and do what they do best often leads to the most compelling content. And she speaks well to a segment of our target audience, African American women and millennials. So that was for us the trifecta: the right messenger, a targeted audience, and really fun and smart content led to success. So a common question we get about the messengers piece is, how do you identify and connect with the right messenger? So you're not just like sending an email out into the ether. Good question. And so here are the steps that we go through from our campaign's perspective. First, who's the target audience? At Make It Work, we have an overarching campaign goal to reach millennials, women of color, low-income women, and dads of color. I suggest to folks that when you're thinking about content, you're not trying to hit your whole audience at once. So really think through, like, who am I trying to move within our audience? And for this particular piece, it was women of color and millennials. Next, we really think through identifying the media that our target audience consumes. So that's researching the networks, the television programs, the platforms, and outlets that are most heavily consumed by our target audience, and monitoring what's trending on those platforms. Facebook's Audience Insights tool, for example, is a really great way to start identifying your audience's their interests. Once you've identified a handful of shows, podcasts, publications, and you've kind of added them to your follow list, pay attention to who Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever the platform recommends that you start following then, because those are often people and personalities that could be worth adding to your reach out list. The smaller or more niche the show, publication, or podcast, the more accessible the people often are and interested in collaboration. And researching that person's content and their social reach is also huge, because like the more you can think about what they're producing, the better you can recreate that experience, the experience that personality provides for your own audience. And then the very last thing that I want to say about creating smart content with the right messenger is when we create public-facing content like videos, photo essays, and other multimedia projects, we need to consider how that content is produced as well. And by that, I mean a commitment to working with crews, writers, directors, and creators who are women and people of color. It's important in the same way that we often talk about diversity in front of the camera, to reflect that diversity behind the camera as well. It's not only the right thing to do to live our values, but content that's created by the same people that you're trying to move and motivate has a better chance of resonating with your key audiences. Next slide. So the next lesson learned is it is really important to lift up and center the voices of real people in your content. We found that the voices of real people who were most impacted by what we call pocketbook issues were our strongest asset in 2016. We succeeded when we shared personal stories of people who are struggling with our issues, but who also believe that there's a path forward. and that change is possible. Our Make It Work ambassadors, which are basically real people we identified both online and through our field program who had a direct connection to our core issues, became the perfect messengers for both our state-based and national communications work in 2016. By working with a group of women that are able to speak from the heart about how these issues impact their lives and the lives of their friends, neighbors, and family, we were able to showcase and highlight issues that otherwise can feel kind of abstract or inaccessible. And we were able to repackage them as compelling and relevant. As an example, in 2016, we launched a campaign called The Real People of America. This campaign starred our Make It Work ambassadors in Nevada and spotlighted their real life experiences. They appeared in straight-to-camera video as well as like a spoof campaign ad that was scripted, but we didn't use actors, we used real people. And they also starred in a series of Humans of New York styled photo essays. We collected these on Medium, creating a virtual story bank that shows the complex ways that our issues really impact real people's lives. This content, our Real People of America content, was seen close to 1.5 million times in the month before the election, including over 500,000 video views. So moving forward, we know for sure that our audience has a strong appetite for news that centers all of us and news that shows how other people just like them are taking action. The next slide. And so this is, my last sort of lesson learned. After the election, I was talking to one of our ambassadors, and she said something that really resonated and has stuck with me moving forward into this year. And that is that moving forward as a movement or a series of movements, we can't leave people feeling sad and stuck. A lot of the rhetoric coming out from all kinds of our groups post-Trump is panicked, right? And rightfully so. The policies, so many policies from his administration are atrocious and leave our communities feeling attacked and left behind. But it's not enough to tell people about how horrible everything is. We have to give them actions that make them feel like they can help and actually create the world that they want to see. It's not enough to just say, like, stop the freight train of terrible, but we have to also encourage people to create. So I would suggest moving forward, balancing the attack-based, threat-based content with content that leads with our progressive vision of the world we want to see, instead of always leading with Trump's vision or the right's vision or this administration's vision. Instead of stop Trump, kind of support XYZ. In terms of how we saw this at play last year, even before the election, we saw really high engagement around inspirational quotes and images that weren't tied to a policy ask at all. People want to feel good, and to the extent that your communications program can help them do that, that leads to more long-term engagement with kind of the more serious asks. We also saw really high engagement around content that was centered around like a factoid or an explainer style video. And we think that that resonated so well because it allowed our audience to feel like they were armed with the facts that they needed to make decisions around our policy agenda and to better like shape the world that they want to see. So those are just like a handful of lessons learned for this year. And I'm really looking forward to getting into this more with folks at the conclusion of the presentation and answering your questions and thinking through this more.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Alicia. And I know that we at Vision, have really enjoyed, the opportunities that we've had, to support you guys and to work with you. And I consider the work that Make It Work is doing to be among the most cutting edge in terms of really digging in to communities and lifting up and inspiring communities. So I'm going to talk about how to win the internet and influence people, which is a little nod to Dale Carnegie, who wrote a famous book. It's really important right now on the internet to make friends and in order to influence people. So I think people have been taking some of the wrong lessons from how Trump both started ahead in his social game and his campaign and stayed ahead. I'm also going to touch on how people are innovating around influencer engagement and give you some practical tools that are free or low cost for how you can identify the right messengers. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on growth marketing and the concept there. So some of you, like me, might be fans of Saturday Night Live. As you know, they've been really hitting hard on the Trump administration. And this is a slide from their cold open that they did a while back that was all about Trump tweets. And it was poking fun to a certain extent of his penchant for tweeting, but also talking to ordinary Americans, high schoolers, just ordinary people who also happen to maybe be influencers. And I think that in that, even though SNL was poking fun, there's a secret sauce there in terms of the Trump campaign's focus on community influencers and not just using the internet as broadcast medium, but an ongoing conversation both with people who agreed with them and also who disagreed. So let's just deconstruct this. This is the next few slides are from Quintly. It's an internet startup that did a really great profile and analysis of the social media presences of both the Clinton campaign and the Trump campaign. Trump is orange or red, depending on how you see color. Clinton is blue. If you still have some PTSD, you can think of them as Tweedledee and Tweedledum for the purposes of this. But as you can see, from the very jump of the general election, Clinton was behind. The Clinton campaign was behind in Facebook fans and Twitter followers and never closed that gap. Next. It wasn't for lack of trying. Certainly they were doing a lot of posting, both on Facebook and actually exceeded in terms of tweets out. But there was a lot of quantity, but was it quality? Next slide. And it wasn't for lack of advertising. You can see that Clinton actually ran more Facebook ads than the Trump campaign, but without a lot of success. Next slide. Here's where Trump really blew it away in terms of interactions. And this is what we call the network effect. Every time they posted something, they got up to 2x the comments, retweets, replies, shares, which means that as someone saw their content, it just got distributed much more effectively and rapidly throughout the internet ecosystem where more people could see it. And so this is where the Clinton campaign just never understood, never really grokked that you have to actually dialogue with people. The internet is not just about broadcast. So we're in this movement moment where there are new tactics, many of which have been pioneered by for-profit companies for some time, plus the organic efforts of citizen movements that's starting to lead social change. Next. So if you want to be good at influencer engagement, it means finding the right people at the right moment with the right message. No longer is it effective to just think of yourselves as, well, we're just talking to the general public. We're just hoping that people will find us. You want to actually get to know your influencers, the people who are either really excited about you and have their own social networks, or the people who are dialoguing about your issue and don't realize that they could ally with you. You want to engage with them regularly and not just ask them to do things, but actually get input from them. You want to personalize. After the first debate, I actually did a fair amount of tweeting and ended up getting a whole bunch of press releases from the Clinton campaign. They never actually asked me to do anything. I'm an online influencer myself, and it was a very missed opportunity for them in terms of engagement. So you want your engagement to feel personal and relevant to that person, and that's how you're going to increase the reach of your message. Next. So one way to do that is to actually use direct personal influencer interactions and focusing on regular people and micro influencers. So you see this is a tweet from our president, and he's mentioning @filibuster. Now @filibuster, that sounds like it could be some right-wing think tank, right? you are wrong. It's actually a 16-year-old from Beverly Hills, California, with whom Donald Trump actually talked on a regular basis and would lift up. And imagine how excited he and his whole community was, and other people. And at Filibuster, very much an influencer. You know, that kid was online dialoguing very regularly with all types of people across the conservative spectrum. So I think I mentioned that we created Attentively. Attentively actually brought a lot of the tools that for-profits are using in terms of marketing automation, deep social listening, big data analysis, taking your email list and matching it with social media profiles to understand better, you know, who are the people, who are the moms on your list who have big networks, who are the media and the bloggers who you could talk to. So here's an example of how you can actually tweet your supporters almost automatically, listening, because we know you have limited time, limited resources, limited staff. It's all about building relationships with people who have reach and relevance in the right communities. There's just an Ad Age article that came out, I think either today or yesterday, that talks about how micro-influencers are crushing it. And the smaller the influencer, the more trusted they are by their followers. As Alicia was mentioning, people think about, oh, if only Beyonce would tweet about us. Like, that would solve all of our problems. And in fact, as you might recall, the Clinton campaign had lots of big stars out there pitching for them, again, to no avail, because people ultimately said, yeah, that's great that Beyonce supports Clinton. What about me? What about people like me? So here, you know, we tend to break it up in using Klout scores, Klout with a K. It's a well-known social influencer ranking. Of course, it's great to have VIPs, and sometimes you get the internet famous, right, who are in that maybe 80 to 90 Klout score. But we have found that the folks in that 40 to 60 Klout score range, the everyday influencers, people who are influential in their communities, are often more accessible, more excited to partner with you, and you line up, say, 10 to 100 of those, you're going to get an equal amount of exposure and a much more trusted messenger than you would having, you know, someone like a Woody Harrelson vibe for you out there on the internet. So here's just an example of responding. This is Craig Newmark, founder of Craigslist and Craigslist Foundation, and making it easy to identify him and to tweet out. I want to touch on Instagram. This is a snapshot from the 2017 M&R nonprofit benchmarks, and it talks about the rapid growth of Instagram. It's something that we've been following as well, working with Facebook. Of course, folks should know that and recall that Facebook owns Instagram. It is the fastest growing nonprofit community engine, and by their analysis, if you're staying on track, you should have at least 39 followers per 1,000 email subscribers, and I would say that's a minimum. So looking at some recent data about Instagram, we can see there on the right that over 60%, a majority of 18 to 29-year-olds are using Instagram at this point. And when we see that tipping point for a social network, that's how we know that the rest of those demographics below it will start to adopt it as well. I was just at F8, which is the Facebook Developer Conference, and it's clear that Instagram is going to be putting a lot of weight and energy into Instagram because they can see these numbers too. I think an interesting note here also is that Instagram, it's not just being used by urban populations, it also has heavy penetration in rural communities, which can be a bonus for those of you who are looking to diversify your outreach. Next slide. In contrast, we can see that Twitter is starting to flatten out and plateau in terms of its penetration. It actually has less penetration at this point among the American population. It's becoming somewhat of a niche platform that's used by media, by super activists, by organizations as a public forum. So I think that's important to keep in mind in terms of your priority and which channels you're using for which communication. So we've talked a lot about influencer engagement, and there are some great tools. As you may be saying to yourself, oh gosh, you know, where would I even get started figuring out who are the influencers I should be talking to. And it may sound like a lot of work to you, but what I'm here to tell you is by taking a more strategic approach and a more segmented, a more precise approach to your online engagement and organizing, you're going to get more conversions and better results. So we've listed a few here that are low cost or in some cases free. I really like Social Rank. You can try it after this. It focuses on Twitter and Instagram and figuring out not just who your most valuable engagers are, followers, but also the people who are most engaged among your followers, who are already liking everything or hearting or retweeting, so that you can have a dialogue with those folks. Demographics Pro and LeadSift are also really great tools to check out. So I think I mentioned that I was invited to F8, which is the big Facebook developer conference, to help represent the nonprofit community. It's once again this year, really great honor. They actually had a growth marketing session led by the head of their growth marketing team, because Facebook needs to grow in their reach as well, right? Just like all of us. And you don't have to believe Alicia or myself or Lee about the whole concept of right message, right moment, right time. This is a slide directly taken from Brian Hale's presentation at F8 on how Facebook has grown their audience. And basically they said, look, once you have a great product or service or idea or message that changes the world, you want to grow from that base of support. Right people means targeting, really narrowing in on who's going to be most interested and engaged and impacted by this message. Right place means your content is in context, it has intent. And right time means you've actually researched what's the best timing. What are our users' behavior? What does our community respond to or not respond to? Not everyone should receive the same message, because not everyone, even in your target audience, is interested and impacted by every issue the same way. So I would search online for F8 growth marketing to find this talk. It's about 20 or 30 minutes long, very much worth your time to understand with precision some tools that anyone can use that are being pioneered by Facebook right now. So just to sum it up, are your tools and tactics stuck in 2007 instead of 2017, right? Are you back at the turn of the century where you're thinking to yourself, well, I guess we have a Facebook page. Is that enough? It's just not enough. For most of our clients, we see that Facebook, Twitter, and soon Instagram are in their top 3 to 5 refers to their website. Understanding that, right, that this is the most powerful driver into your organization. How much time and energy are you spending doing smart segmentation, doing social ad experimentation, doing marketing automation, doing influencer engagement, right? If you start to adapt these strategies, again, that have been in use for years in the for-profit sector, you're going to find that you're going to have stronger success in your fundraising, in your advocacy, and in your media penetration. So, as we mentioned, look, the age of broadcast outreach is over. It's not about quantity of messages that you're sending out, it's about quality. And actually, if you're using smart segmentation, you can deliver more quantity while increasing the quality that is experienced by your community. It's all about finding the right people at the right time and delivering the right message. And these tools are actually in use across the internet. The nonprofit sector has actually fallen behind in using these techniques. And so I think in order to keep up, not only with social change, but with the rapid innovation of technology today and the tools that we have at our disposal, it's so critical to go beyond, this notion of opens and clicks and just conversions. Lee, is there anything you'd add to that?
Well, I'd just say that in 2004, I worked for MoveOn.org, and if you were on MoveOn's email list in 2004, chances are I probably wrote some of the emails trying to get you to click to join a campaign or donate money. And sadly, in 2016, I saw so many of the same kinds of things that we wrote in 2004. So, this hopefully shows you where the cutting edge is now in using the digital tools that we have to engage our audience. So thanks again to Cheryl and Alicia for sharing them with us.
No, that's great. Thanks, Lee. Okay, well, it's time to open it up for your questions. So what have you got for us? Well, I'd like to ask a question to Alicia. Were there tools that you guys used to identify your target audience that you found useful?
Our good friend Google was really helpful. No, but honestly, we actually were lucky enough to be able to do some market research on our target audiences, and I found that to be really helpful and not as expensive as you might think in order to get a really comprehensive understanding of the media outlets and platforms and the types of people that resonated with our core audience. And once we did that, we were able to just go back and really spend some time on the platforms that were identified. And again, see who had the largest social reach, what kind of conversations they were having, and reach out based on that.
Awesome. It looks like we do have a question coming in from David, and he asks, what are our top don't do's? Do you have any thoughts on that, Alicia? Otherwise, I can go.
Do not share a press release on Twitter. My top don't do's. One of a controversial don't do that I would love to have I'd be happy to have more of a conversation with folks on this phone about, is the effectiveness of Twitter storms and tweet chats. I think that those have become the go-tos of our world, of our organizations, and so often we put, as communications managers and social media managers, we put so much time into the thunderclap and the tweet storm, and so often we're just talking to each other during those times. So I would recommend that you think outside of the tweet storm when you're thinking about how to foster some of these conversations, because even though it feels like it's not broadcast communications, I think in practice they often are. You're broadcasting your message to a group of like-minded organizations who are then echoing that organization. And unless you have really innovative partners for those tactics, I don't think that they always reach the people we want them to reach.
I would concur with that, and I think that part of the challenge is that people aren't doing that influencer engagement up front. Just as, if you were having a meeting, right, a community organizing meeting in a community, you would do some outreach first to invite certain key people that are activists, that are leaders, and say, hey, can you join us? This is a really important topic and we'd love your input. You should do that online. One of the philosophical tenets that I govern my outreach around is that behind every click, behind every like, behind every retweet is a person, a human being who is expressing their values and their dreams and their hopes and their struggles, right, to their friends, their family, to the larger world. And if you really treat people that way online, they feel it. It shows. Thanks. Let's see. We've got a question coming in from Greg, who asks, if we don't create a lot of original images or pictures, how can we engage in Instagram actively? Well, one of the things you can do, again, using Social Rank, you could take a look at, okay, who's following us right now on Instagram, or you can follow a lot of people on Instagram and start to riff off of what other people are doing. And even if you're not producing images, original images or pictures, why? Why not? Surely you're out there in the community, or you are engaging in awareness and education and outreach and mobilizing. As you have your folks out in the field, if that's what you're doing, have them take pictures that you can then share with folks. That on the ground, immediate, realistic. They can be gritty. They can be, they don't have to even be totally in focus. What you want is that compelling, real-time data that people feel is bringing them into your mission. Alicia, is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I would, Instagram doesn't only have to be photos. Obviously, that's the most used way to interact with that platform. But like to my point about using inspirational quotes and messages, there are images that you might create for another platform that are just really visual and beautiful and share like a hopeful message, or feature like an image that you're using as part of a campaign on other platforms that can also perform really well on Instagram.
Yeah, quotations really perform well. So you could take a quotation from your leadership, from your members, just the comments that you're finding on other social media platforms, or as you're out there, put those in text and send those out. People love to like and share those types of images. Okay, Hillary asks, the Facebook page has a feature where you can buy ad space to boost posts. Is it worth it? Do you see significant increases in interactions with posts that are boosted this way? Absolutely. So one thing to really keep in mind is that Facebook and Twitter and a lot of other social networks are public companies now. They have to sell. And so the entire Facebook and Instagram algorithms have shifted to not only privilege video, that's important to understand, but to privilege ad content. And so even low dollar ad boosting of your content can make a huge difference. If you're just doing organic reach, if you're just posting something up and hoping people will see it, you're only going to get maybe 10% of even your followers. That doesn't even count anyone else seeing it. Whereas if you're choosing something like friends of friends, you're automatically multiplying exponentially the number of people who are going to see your content for a very low dollar spend. I would say every organization should set aside a small, even a few $100s for key posts that seem to be performing well. It's best to pick the ones that are already performing well and then boost those to get that extra organic reach bump as you're boosting it, can make a huge difference. And then Hillary also asked, well, why not share a press release on Twitter? Because no one's trying to hear a press release. Press releases have the most dead language possible, right? No one's trying to hear that. No one has time for that in this day and age. Again, you need to look no further than Donald Trump, reality TV star and online influencer, who has taken online influence to the maximum office in this nation, to understand the importance and relevance of authentic dialogue with your community. There's no press release ever that has felt like authentic dialogue with the community. I mean, it's not intended for a broad audience, right? It's intended for media. So Chris asks, if your project has multiple target audiences, how should you prioritize engagement? How can you effectively target one group without disengaging other audience segments? Alicia, do you want to talk to this a little bit?
Sure. I think it depends, in terms of being relevant to the time, what you're trying to accomplish at that moment and who you're really trying to speak to at that moment. So like we had a campaign around dads of color that we launched around Father's Day. That was just like a natural fit for us to talk to dads at that time. So like in terms of being like the right place, the right time, you can prioritize your audience based on like the issue you're trying to move and the time you're trying to move that audience. We have found that very little of the content we create actually like alienates our other audiences. So like around our dad's content, actually we found that women engaged like at very high levels around some of that content. So it doesn't necessarily, like prioritizing one audience doesn't necessarily mean that you've like completely alienated or kicked another audience to the curb.
Right, it's just as if, you're focusing, of course, you may have many issues that you're trying to engage on, but you choose different issues to focus on or different campaigns at different times, and therefore you should choose different audiences to focus on. People who support you are going to, of course, support your larger mission, but they may be more or less interested, if it's, for example, a Colorado-based campaign, not everyone in the United States may be as interested as people who live in the West. right, and specifically in Colorado. So it's just being really smart and strategic rather than taking the elephant gun approach. Look, I got my a business degree. I have an MBA from Georgetown. There were two nonprofit-focused people in that MBA program, and our strategy professor said, hope is not a strategy. Hoping that the majority of your audience is going to vibe to a particular issue is just not a strategy for getting people motivated. Okay, we've got a couple more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one more example for that I think is really relevant for the work many of us are doing right now. And that is, if we look at the election results, some of the drop-off happened around millennials that voted for third-party candidates and the quote-unquote like Obama base that didn't turn out in as high numbers. It would behoove us all to think about those audiences more deeply right now and to think about content that resonates with them. The great thing about that is content that resonates with millennials, content that resonates with women of color, people of color in urban areas, for example. That content also resonates with progressive whites. Like our base is going to come along with us, and so we really just need to think a little bit more about like who's not already on board that we can bring on board.
Thank you, Alicia. That's great. We've actually got a tip from Ashley who says that Canva is a good place to make images for social, and they have platform-specific sizing, and Canva's free. So thanks, Ashley. Yeah, it's really easy to make images these days. You know, you can find community members even, you know, if you actually do some research on your top engagers now, you may find some people who would love to jump in and help you create more images. So why don't we make this our last question from Stephen. If we begin an Instagram channel, what are the minimum number of posts per week for it to be successful and have momentum? In your experience, how much time does it take to manage the account in comparison to Twitter, Facebook, etc.? Good question. So it depends on what you're doing on Instagram. I would say trying to post something at least every other day, a few times a week to begin would be reasonable. And again, starting to do some research on following other people because then they're more likely to follow you. So doing a little bit of research into who are the top influencers on Instagram on our topic, or who are already members on our Facebook page. Again, Facebook and Instagram are increasingly walking step by step together, including in the social ads manager. When you run a Facebook ad, the Instagram ads platform is integrated. You're almost doing it at the same time. So, you know, I think that it is, you know, the things that you're posting on Facebook are probably relevant for Instagram. So it's not as if you have to do, you know, a lot of double work. And if you're using a tool like Hootsuite, which has a lot of great free influencer engagement tools that you can build in as apps, you can actually post simultaneously on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a huge ad. Again, it's just doing a little bit of upfront thought of, you know, what's our target for each of these channels? Who's our target audience? What are we trying to achieve? And then what's the content that we're serving today that's going to meet our goals? And again, not just putting something up there for the sake of putting something up there, but giving it some thought. Having a strategy is what's most important. If you spend, look, we recommend that people spend at least 15 to 30 minutes a day, minimum, just on their social platforms. Of course, these days we also recommend that you have a half-time or a full-time community manager who are helping to guide and convene your digital community. But it's of central importance that you take this stuff seriously. This is where the movement is, folks. The movement is online. So if you're doing a whole bunch of other stuff, you know, and saying, well, we just don't have time. You know, we just don't have time to tweet. Like you're playing the game wrong, and you're going to get played. Okay, we just saw that happen in the 2016 election. Okay, no matter what you're doing out there, you need to see digital as a critical pillar that's going to propel the rest of your work. And with that, I think we are just about out of time. So in our remaining minute, You can see on our last slide, we're here if you'd like to dialogue after this. Happy to answer questions and happy to send you any of those studies that we talked about or the F8 video. Of course, Lee would love to hear from you. Did you like this? Were you like, oh, this is so rad, I loved it? Or you're like, I hated this, and I specifically hate Cheryl. He wants to know that. What other topics would you like addressed in a webinar similar to this that you might attend or that you'd suggest? Alicia's also available to answer questions. And again, we'll be sending around the archive of this. Please do share this with your fellow grantees, with other partners. We'll send around a survey as well, plus the PDF of the deck. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Have a great day. Any closing words, Lee?
Just thanks. I'll echo everything you just said. Thanks very much for joining us.
All right. Peace
Thanks,
out,
everyone.
party people. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.